Hey art nerds, I've got another alcohol marker review for you guys today. Today we're taking a look at the Graphit brush markers. Some of you guys have requested that I review these markers, and I purchased these from Marker Universe during their 25% off sale in early October. And I bought the comic set of 12 as well as a few open stock markers, hoping to kind of round out the collection and have enough markers to be able to do a review for you guys. So I'm going to have links down in the description below, as well as a transcript of most of this review. Unfortunately, I accidentally deleted my original show notes, so these are going to be kind of abridged. I apologize. So the packaging is a plastic reusable snap together container. On the front is a sticker that designates which set this is. On the back is a sticker that designates the entire line. Graphit is a French line of markers, and they are distributed by OZ or Oz International. And they offer quite a few other products. So, like I said, Graphit offers a lot of different products, but most of them look pretty familiar if you check out the Marker Universe site or if you check out the Oz International site. Their alcohol markers remind me a lot of shuttle art markers, particularly the nubby caps. They offer water-based brush pens that are quite similar to the Tombow ABT/Kuretake Art and Graphic Twin. They offer paint markers very similar to Posca, and Miss and Mr. Graphit look a lot like the Bodycoon and Bodychan posable figures. They're available in two different types, the fine and chisel and the brush and liner, which we're taking a look at today. On Marker Universe, a set of 12, like the comic ones here, are $63.48, which is a pretty substantial chunk for markers. And open stock, they are $5.29 each. They are refillable, and they do have replaceable brushes available. For this, there's a brush on one side and a 0.5 millimeter nib on the other. They're available in 98 total colors in the brush range, although on the Oz International site, it does say there's 65 colors in the range. I haven't seen anywhere where that full range would be available. The refill inks are available through Marker Universe, and there are replaceable nibs available, but you may have some difficulty finding them. And Graphit promises the Japanese-made brush nib is made of synthetic fibers for generous ink flow. And these markers are also available on Amazon. So the packaging, the 12-piece sets come in plastic snap boxes. This one was difficult for me to open because there was clear tape at the top that held it shut. Paper tape would be easier to see and remove. The boxes snap shut in two places and feature a slide-out drawer that doesn't slide out completely. That's a bit annoying for me because it'd be nice to slide it out and just have that drawer on my desk to be able to grab markers. But I like how sturdy the box is. I like the fact that it's modular and could be stacked, and the fact that it's reusable. Inside is an informational pamphlet that you see here in French and English that includes a color chart. It shows the other available sets as well as the colors available in those sets, which is helpful if you're trying to avoid duplication. Most sets include the blender marker. The pamphlet also talks about some of their other products. So here is an overview of the brush marker, the one we're taking a look at today. Here is an ad for the replaceable nib. And it comes in a pack of 3. And then you can see here, it just pulls to slide out, but it doesn't slide out all the way, which is a little bit frustrating. All right, so let's take a look at the markers themselves. At first glance, these markers look really familiar. They look a lot like the Milo art markers and the shuttle art markers, both of which I've reviewed here on this channel. I don't have them on hand anymore. I donated them to the St. Charles Parish Public Library, so I can't use them in the comparison, but I'll link their videos here if you're curious about those as well. And there are a few differences, but most of them are surface differences. These are larger bodied alcohol markers with a triangular body, similar to the Artist Loft markers. The triangular body is a little less prone to rolling, but these are still really rolly, and it's supposed to be more ergonomic, but I find them a little bit more difficult to hold. The caps look like they should post, but they don't. When you try to post them, they just pop off the back. The grips do make them a bit easier to grab and remove, but they're still a little bit difficult to pull off the marker. I found that I had to use more force when pulling the caps off. You want a cap that clicks on securely, but you don't want it so secure that you're struggling to remove the cap as you're swatching or as you're working with the markers. However, those little nubbies on the cap might make it a good choice for artists with grip issues. The cap has a notch to prevent rolling, but these still roll around quite a bit, especially if you've removed one of the caps. The marker body screening is fairly minimal, a designator for the fine tip and as well as the brush, the logo, and a B designator indicating that these are brush markers. Graphit bullet and chisel markers are black. Graphit brush and line markers are white. Marker color name and number is on the barcode sticker, so the removable sticker, as well as the color chipped caps. So now let's compare these to a few other alcohol markers. The markers we're going to be comparing them to, as you guys could see, are the Tombow ABT, Prismacolor, the Blick Studio Brush Marker, Copic Chow, Copic Sketch, of course, the Graphit marker, and an Ohuhu brush marker. The Graphit markers, have a smaller color range than most alcohol markers at 96 colors, including the Blick Studio brush markers. They've just added a bunch of new colors to their range, so they've expanded quite a bit. The Blick Studio brush markers are cheaper and have a foam rubber brush and are comparable to Copic. So the comparison markers, the Tombow ABT is not refillable. It has a fiber brush and a tri-chisel. The Prismacolor markers that I'm showing here in this review are the brush markers. They are not refillable. They have a foam brush and a bullet nib. The Blick Studio brush marker is refillable. It has replaceable nibs, a foam brush, and a chisel. The Copic Chow is refillable, has replaceable nibs, a foam brush, and a chisel. The Copic Sketch is refillable, has replaceable nibs, a foam brush, and a chisel. The Graphit brush is refillable, has replaceable nibs, has a fiber brush, and a fine point. And the Ohuhu brush is, according to Ohuhu and my research, not refillable, doesn't offer replaceable nibs, a fiber brush, and a chisel. So Graphit falls in the middle regarding price. At around $5.30, it's about as much as a Prismacolor or a Copic Chow when you purchase them from Blick, which tends to offer cheaper rates, but it's more expensive than Blick and Ohuhu. So for the Graphit markers, the caps feature the color code, but not the color name, which is fairly unusual as most marker companies have both on their caps. So while I was handling these, I noticed just how similar these are to the Ohuhu markers. So I decided we needed to do a standalone comparison where we compare Graphit and Ohuhu head to head to help you guys see which one is the better choice for you. I also want to point out that these markers were purchased out of pocket with funds from my wonderful patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for your support. Your monthly pledges enable me to be able to buy art supplies to review and to dedicate time to reviewing art supplies. So if you found this tutorial helpful, useful, or informative, it would be a huge help if you told other people about this review, if you shared it on social media, or if you just hit like and left a comment and let me know what your favorite alcohol marker is. Maybe it's one I've never even heard of and I still need to review it, or maybe it's an old favorite and we've got that in common. All right, so let's compare the Ohuhu brush markers to the Graphit brush markers. I've selected a handful of similar colors from both sets, and I'm going to be swatching in my old faithful, the Strathmore Mixed Media Sketchbook. This is my fourth one for alcohol marker tests, believe it or not. I have done a lot of tests here on this channel, so if you're on the market for alcohol markers, I hope you'll consider searching in my search bar for whatever you're looking for. I bet I've got a review for that. So there are a lot of similar colors between the two sets, and the markers, spoiler, handle almost the same. So this is the Ohuhu field test, the girl with the pigtails there. I'll link that in the description below. And these are my Ohuhu swatches. And in general, I really like the Ohuhu brush markers. I think they're very affordable. I think they're very accessible. I think they handle decently well. I think they are a great option if you're interested in getting started with alcohol markers, or if you're like a teacher or a librarian looking to acquire some markers for, you know, large group use, this is a very economical way to do that. Long term, they're not quite as economical as, say, Copic or Blick because you can't replace the nibs, and they're not refillable, and they do wear out over time. So I am swatching the Ohuhu markers first. And first is just a color swatch, and second is when I go over it with the blender marker. For the Ohuhu, I'm using the Chisel. That gives you the most accurate color representation. Because the Graphit markers don't have a chisel, I'm going to use the brush for that. And I'm trying to demonstrate the color depth, how the brushes handle, as well as how the blender affects the actual color itself. So there are a lot of similar colors between the two sets, and the markers handle almost the same. The brush looks identical to me between the two markers, but of course, one has a fine point nib, which is kind of unusual with alcohol markers, and the other has a chisel nib. And those who watched the Ohuhu video probably remember me saying it's pretty similar to Shuttle Art markers and Milo Art markers. It wouldn't surprise me at all if these inexpensive alcohol markers came from one factory and used the same alcohol inks. If this is the case, just find the cheapest one that offers the features you want. Don't really worry about being brand specific. Also, if this is the case, it means that Ohuhu brushes are replaceable if you use a Graphit brush and could be refilled using Graphit ink. However, the color numbers and names are not the same, similar to the Colorit markers using proprietary names on a stock marker body, so you may need to find a swatch chart to best color match. Unfortunately, only having the comic set and like 3 open stock markers, I can't really provide you with that chart. But if anybody would like to fund the purchasing of more Graphit markers, I could make such a chart for you guys. All right, let's get down to swatching. So we're going to start with the comic set first. And these kind of sets are always kind of funny to me because I'm a comic artist. I make comics all the time. And the colors that are often picked for these kind of sets are not what I would pick. For like a comic set, me personally, I would recommend if you're making comics and you don't have a lot of alcohol markers, go with a grayscale set, like a warm gray set first, because monotones are great for comics and you can really get more form and expression and contrast with monotones than you would with a similar number of just open stock regular colors. I am happy that it's not just primaries though. They do have kind of a more basic set, but I went with the comic set because it did seem to offer colors that I would be able to use somewhat. So as I said earlier, I'm swatching in my Old Faithful, the Strathmore Mixed Media Sketchbook. I use this for all of my alcohol marker reviews, and I'm now on the 4th one. And using the same kind of sketchbook over and over and over again allows for consistency and makes comparisons between marker brands actually comparable. So when swatching, I noticed that the colors seem a little prone to bleeding. And this was a problem I noticed with the Milo Art markers. It's a problem I noticed with the Ohuhu markers. It's something to do with the inks they're using bleed a lot more than other alcohol markers that I've used in this same sketchbook. The markers are really juicy. They lay down a lot of ink. So, like I said, I swatched the comic set first and then the open stock markers after. The color chips are fairly accurate, and when you're working with such a limited number of colors, it's not like you're really trying to decide between 2 browns that are super close. There's going to be enough differences between the colors that a close enough approximation of the cap is probably going to be good enough for your color selection. So now we're doing blender compatibility. The blenders that I'm going to be testing are rubbing alcohol, Copic, Graphit, Blick Studio, and Artist Loft. And this isn't meant to be like a all marker compatibility test, but these are just some common marker solvents, and I'm just testing to see how reactive they are. This kind of gives us an idea of how well Graphit markers might play with your existing alcohol marker collection. I found that all of the alcohol marker solvents tested did have some sort of reaction, with the strongest reaction being rubbing alcohol and the Artist Loft blender. So these should work with your existing marker collection. So next we're going to do a blending ball. This kind of gives us a chance to see how these markers would handle in a real world situation. Now this video also includes the marker field test, so stay tuned. But the blending ball kind of gives me an idea of what I'm going to be able to do in the field test, how far I can push these markers, and what I can expect. So as I mentioned earlier, these markers are pretty juicy. You won't have issues with streakiness if you work in a couple of layers. The markers are fairly easy to blend because they're fairly reactive. And I know I keep saying this because like every time I do a new stage of testing, it kind of hits me anew. But these remind me so much of the Milo Art, Shuttle Art, and Ohuhu markers. It really wouldn't surprise me if these were purchased and rebranded from the same factory, like it's a private label. So the field test is coming up. For the blending ball test, I went with skin tones because that was the only selection of colors where I had a wide enough gamut that we could go from really light to really dark. You can also go from like yellow to green to blue if you wanted to try it that way. I usually just go with whatever colors I have like 4 of in the same color family or very similar color family. So I might go from blues to purples. And it really just gives me a chance to see how they layer, how they blend out, whether there's like speckling to the blending, which these do have some speckling when you overblend. And overblending is one of my favorite techniques. The speckling doesn't bother me so much, but if you're somebody who likes very, very clean marker work, these are not going to be able to give you that for a number of reasons. Like I said, they are very reactive, so they tend to be very bleedy. If you like to work on thicker papers, you're going to get a lot more bleeding. And I am a thicker paper person myself, so, you know, I don't mind it. I don't mind the bleeding. But if you're doing very clean, very precise work, or you work really small, these are going to be a lot more challenging to use. Now, they do have that finer point, which could make them really useful for smaller details or for people who like coloring in coloring books. But because these are so juicy and so bleedy, they might not be the best pick for a coloring book that has images on both sides and you want to color both sides because they're going to bleed through for sure. So I'm testing out the fine point now. When it comes to alcohol markers, I mostly just use the brush for the vast majority of what I do. But since the fine point nib is a little bit novel, I haven't seen it in too many markers. I think the Prismacolor brushes that are not the brush brushes, the ones that have the tri-chisel nib, I think they used to have this kind of a fine point nib, and now I think they have the bullet point nib, but you guys totally let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. Theoretically, it should be the same color as the brush offers. When it comes to water-based markers that have pigment, that is often not the case, as with the Winsor & Newton watercolor markers. But in this instance, they do seem to be the same color. So these could be good for like brush lettering or fine details, or even doing line art on top of your work. You could use these markers. Now, if you're doing them on top of alcohol markers, they will be a little bit reactive. The blender one, disappointingly, did not have hardly any reaction at all on top of the blue that I put down there. I was really hoping we could use it for, like, I don't know, secret messages or something. Okay, art nerds, this is a double header. Now we're on to the field test. So we're going to be using as many markers as possible in the same Strathmore Mixed Media Sketchbook numero 4. So we are gonna uncap this puppy and we're gonna start playing around with our markers. So you can see on the back there's a color chart of all 96 available colors. Something you might want to do is maybe scratch off or swatch the ones you already have just to help you keep track. What would be more helpful to me would be a swatch chart of the markers that were in this pack on the back, or if they circled them or just made some other kind of designation to be like, hey, these are the markers that are included. So this is the field test. It's a pretty simple drawing of Kara. I keep telling you, I keep seeing similarities with the Milo Art and the Milo Pro. So it's very similar to the field test that I did for the Milo Art markers and the Milo Pro markers. Again, I wish I could just slip that packaging sleeve all the way off, but unfortunately, it only goes so far. So for this field test, since I'm working with a limited number of colors and they kind of range across the gamut, I'm going to work with a technique that works well for limited color. We're going to go really cartoony. So I'm using the storm blue color to shade Kara's eyes and her teeth, and then I'm blending that out quite a bit with the colorless blender. And keep in mind, these are really reactive, so you can do a lot of over blending techniques. I use a similar technique when I'm coloring the centers of the wild roses here. So I apply yellow and then I heavily blend it out using the colorless blender. For her hair, for her skin, sorry, I'm going to really rely on the white of the paper to carry the majority of what's going on. So I'm focusing mainly on coloring the areas that would be in shadow using the lightest of the skin tones. And this is what I think they have in mind when it comes to quote-unquote comic coloring, is you're mostly using the white of the paper, or you might be using two colors to color something rather than building up a lot of color. I mean, it's a 12 color set, you know, what are you going to do? I would say the comic set, if you color a lot of Caucasian or very light skinned people, is going to give you enough colors to kind of get started on that. But if you have more diversity in your work, you're definitely going to want to pick up more of the open stock colors. And Marker Universe's swatches are not super accurate, so you may want to try and find a color chart online if possible. So I'm using one of the open stock pinks to just kind of add some blush to her cheeks, to her lips, to the insides of her ears, and the underside of her neck. And since this is such a blendy marker, I'm blending back out with the skin tone. I allowed that to dry, and I also want to point out, like, these are alcohol markers, right? And alcohol ink dries much faster than water-based ink, but because these really saturate the paper, they do take longer to dry than you might be used to with other alcohol markers. So alcohol markers work a lot like watercolor in that with wet over wet, you're going to get softer, more blendy transitions. With wet over dry, you're going to get more striking delineations. And this is really useful when it comes to developing shadows. So the longer dry time is important to keep in mind because it's going to kind of change how you handle your markers, and it may change how you handle these markers if you're using them mixed with other markers. So I allowed my skin tone to dry. I applied another layer of the same thing. Because these are so juicy, I wasn't able to get as many variations of tone as I would have liked. In some of my Copic marker tutorials, I talk about how you can get 3 layers of tone from every Copic, so you should layer your markers. You might get 2 with this one. So used with a light hand, the brush seems to work decently well. Although if you're heavy-handed, this brush is going to get mushy on you. It just doesn't have the resiliency to take a lot of pressure. The collar on the fine tip end really throws me. Like every other brand puts it on the brush, so it's flying in the face of known convention. And you guys probably noticed that I keep uncapping the wrong end and then recapping it. It's because I'm looking at the gray collar and my brain, having 10 plus years of alcohol marker experience, is like, oh yeah, that's the brush. And it's not the brush. So these have good ink flow. There's really no issues with streaking, and the brush doesn't try to grab the paper. These are a lot better than the Tombow ABT markers. So here's a close-up of my over blending technique. And what that means is I'm just really heavily utilizing the blender to push the color back and to kind of get a softer, more watercolory effect. And this is a technique that's great if you have kind of a limited number of markers and you're trying to get the most out of each marker possible. It does eat up your markers, but it's a way to kind of stretch a smaller marker collection. I also have some tutorials here on this channel where I show you other ways you can stretch a very small marker collection using watercolor and color pencil. So I hope you guys will check those out. So the comics color selection feels a bit limited. There's a couple of skin tones and then a few high chroma colors, which would work okay for spot color, but it would be really difficult to blend them out and to get any kind of transitions. What I mean by that is there's red, there's green, it's like very primary colors. And actually when you're new to markers, that's really a more limited palette to work with. I also reviewed the sketch marker alcohol markers, and that's coming up soon. And I bought their morning set, which is all pastels, and that was much easier to blend and use. So from my point of view and the kind of art that I make, pastel sets are much easier to start making pieces with for me and how I blend than say a very saturated primary set where there's no intermediate or darker colors. And it is very easy to get a smooth, clean, flat fill with these. It can be pretty bleedy, especially with the brush. So here on the hair, you guys can see I'm adding in a second layer of, gosh, I don't know the brown's name. I'm sorry. It's like an oatmeal-y kind of brown. It was one of the open stock colors that I bought to kind of add in some extra skin tones. Actually, I thought this was going to be a warmer color than it was based on the color swatch. And you can kind of see how I'm able to get a couple of tones of color from the first layer, which just kind of primes the paper and it's lighter and it's maybe a little bit streakier, to the second color, which is more of a flat fill. If you color more slowly with the brush, if you kind of evenly fill the area, you can saturate the paper and you can get kind of a more even fill with less streaking. But I like utilizing kind of the streakiness of that first layer as kind of like the lighter layer. It's one of the ways that I can get a smaller collection of markers to work more like a larger collection. So for these little purple flowers, I'm applying colorless blender first, then dipping in the marker just a little bit, and then applying more colorless blender. And it acts a lot like blending wet into wet, and it gives you some really watercolor-like effects because these are so juicy and they're so prone to blending, and this is probably only going to work on thirstier paper. So if you're working on like a coated marker paper like the Copic or the Express It blending card, you're probably not going to get these kind of watercolor-esque reactions. And this is why I like working on thicker, thirstier papers, is I can get these softer blending transitions. So these things will just roll right off your desk. They're triangular. They're supposed to be a little bit more ergonomic, but they're still pretty rolly. Some brands like Copic have like a flat end, or like the Blick, or like the least rolly markers I own because they're hexagonal. So there's like multiple flat surfaces that the markers just want to sit on. These are not so triangular. They're like a soft triangle, and they'll just kind of start rolling, especially if there's any kind of incline to your desk. So if you have your drawing table propped up, these are not going to lay flat on your desk. They're going to whomp, 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 whomp off onto the floor. These are so much like the Ohuhu brush markers. Like, I kept thinking that the whole time I was handling them. And I really like the Ohuhu brush markers. Don't get me wrong. They're like in my top 5 Copic competition markers right now. So I was really impressed. I thought I wasn't going to like them, and I was really impressed. Both are good, but given the price of the Graphit brush markers, I'd recommend the Ohuhu brush over these. The brush isn't a foam rubber Copic brush. It doesn't have the resiliency, but it's not bad at all. It's one of the better fiber brushes I've reviewed, especially compared to the Tombow ABT Pro brushes, which I hate so much. They're actually pretty good. And again, they are replaceable. And I am pretty sure that Ohuhu uses the exact same brush. So if you love your Ohuhu markers, but they're starting to get worn down, rather than replacing the whole marker, especially if there's ink in it, you might want to check out the prices on the Graphit replaceable brush nibs. So since we're dealing with a more limited color selection, I'm really relying a lot on the white of the paper, using the blender to kind of soften some of the tones and get some intermediate tones in there, and layering the markers to get as much color as possible out of probably 15 colors. I did accidentally buy a duplicate of Storm Blue, so I have 2 Storm Blues, so I can't count that, but I think I have like 15 total Graphit markers right now. And like I said earlier in the review, these were purchased out of pocket. All opinions are my own. I have no affiliation with Marker Universe or with Graphit as a company. So I am reintroducing a little bit of ink here. I'm using the Sakura Pigma BB, that is big brush marker, just to add in some more black so we can get some more contrast and we can get some more depth of tone. And then finally, I was going to go over this with a white Posca to just kind of add some white highlights in, because Posca can be a really easy way to add in some color. But my white Posca was a little dirty and being a little bit difficult. So what I would also recommend, if your Posca is dirty like my Posca is dirty, just use like some white gouache or some P.H. Martin's bleed proof white. And watching this, now I'm like, how would Posca and alcohol marker play together? And that is the question. All right, so let's talk about pros and cons of the Graphit brush markers. The pros: they are refillable. They have a replaceable brush nib. They're available open stock, so you can get the colors you want. And they're available in various size sets, so you can kind of mix and match to curate your marker collection. They do play decently well with other markers as well. The cons: the price. These are super similar to the Ohuhu brush markers, but are more than double the price. They're very prone to blending. They may be difficult to control if you do a lot of layering. The availability: you are not going to see these at most big box brick and mortar art stores, so if you need a quick refill, you're going to have to order it and wait. And they are available on Amazon. However, Marker Universe sent them very quickly. It is a fiber brush tip. While it's one of the better ones, it may be prone to fraying. And these are very juicy and prone to bleeding, especially on thinner papers, so they may bleed through in your sketchbook, which I don't care about. I usually work with a buffer piece of paper underneath, but I know some artists care about that a lot, so it's worth mentioning. So, are the Graphit markers worth it? In my opinion, just go ahead and buy the Ohuhu brush markers. They're basically the same thing, and they're way cheaper. And then if you decide you need more colors, you need more skin tones, you could then maybe decide to buy the Graphit markers. I do think at $5.30, they're kind of overpriced for what they are here in the US. But you guys let me know, do you like Graphit markers? Are you able to find them in open stock stores? And are they cheaper in your area? Does Marker Universe just charge a lot for these markers? Let me know down in the comments below. So I hope this alcohol marker review was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. If you liked it, leave a thumbs up and a comment. And if you like my work, please consider subscribing. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you soon. Bye, guys.